Canaan was a descendant of Ham. Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They were the forefathers of all the people alive today. Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Japheth, they were the forefathers of all the peoples alive today. Canaan was descended from Ham. Canaan begat 12 peoples. See Genesis 10. It says that Canaan begat Sidon, sometimes spelt with a Z, Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, being understood to represent the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Arkites, and the Sinites, and the Arbadites, and the Zamarites, and the Hamathites, and afterwards the families of Canaan, of the Canaanites, were scattered. Afterwards the families of the Canaanites were scattered. So Canaan himself is listed as only one of these 12 peoples. He's also listed as their forefather. So we find this. The term Canaan was both a generic term for all the 12 tribes of Canaan and a specific term for one of the tribes amongst them. The Canaanites were both white and coloured peoples. They were all different physical types are identified as belonging to Canaan. Abraham was the first Hebrew. Abraham had been promised that his seed would inherit 10 out of these 12 Canaanite peoples. It says Genesis 15, on that day the Lord formed a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the Euphrates River. The Canaanites and the Kenizzites and the Cadmonites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Rephaim and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites. Of these 10 Canaanite nations, 3 of them went to families associated with Abraham. By that we include the family of Lot, the nephew of Abraham, and the Amorites and the Moabites received one each of these 3 peoples, and the Edomites also received one. And these 3 peoples, according to tradition, occupied various places in Europe, and eventually they gravitated towards the Atlantic coast of Western Europe. And in the end times, the Israelites will inherit them. Okay? So that is one point. This is mentioned by the Hatam Sofer, 1760-1839. And that is also our understanding, but it is not a universally accepted theme. It is not something that is universally accepted, and it is an interpretation of different sources. And so there may be people who reject this interpretation and they have a legitimate claim of their own. So that's another story. At all events, 7 of these nations were to be given to the Israelites. And these nations were the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. You find in Deuteronomy 20, chapter 20, 16, says, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave anything alive that breathes. Do not leave anything alive that breathes. Completely destroy them. Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Deuteronomy 20. You're also told in Numbers 33, but if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those whom you leave will be as spikes in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they will harass you in the land which you settled in, and I will be what I intended to do them, I will do to you. So they left the Canaanites in the land, and eventually the Canaanites were to cause them a great deal of trouble. The Israelites also intermarried with them, intermixed with them, and were corrupted by them. And one of the places where we find Canaanites was in Germany. And in Germany had the Nazis, and the Germans tried to wipe out the whole of the Jewish people, men, women, and children. We identify the Canaanites as having become part, not all, a portion of the Germans were descended from them, and also other peoples in Europe. And they, from their descendants, may have come those reprobates, those scumbags, those bad people who tried to wipe out the Jewish people. So that is something to consider. That is a solution to a problem that we have in studying history. How could people be so bad to do what they did? And what could justify it? And how did they allow the devil to take them over and to cause them to do such wicked things? So that is a solution. And we find Canaanites in Northern Europe. And others have come across similar conclusions. Theo Veneman was a linguist in Bavaria, and he did quite a bit of work, and based on linguistic sources, he found descendants of the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians in Western Europe, especially in Germany. And the Phoenicians were descendants from the Canaanites. They also founded the city of Carthage. Carthage was, according to their tradition, was especially connected to the city of Sidon. And Veneman found linguistic indications of these peoples having been in that area. According to Veneman, Carthaginians, that is Phoenicians, that is Canaanites, colonized the North Sea region between the 6th and the 3rd centuries BCE. That is the 500s and the 200s BCE. And his evidence includes numerous Semitic loanwords and the Germanic languages, as well as structural features such as strong verbs and similarities between Norse religion and Semitic religion. And others had similar notions or similar ideas, and there is support for this. And this also connects us up to the lost 10 tribes of Israel. The lost 10 tribes of Israel were Israelites from the 10 tribes of Israel who were conquered by the Assyrians, taken into exile, and they moved. And they moved out and they converged in Western Europe. And the Bible speaks of them. It speaks of the Assyrians having done this. In the prophet Amos, in the Hebrew original, chapters 1 and 4 in the Hebrew original speak of Edomites, Philistines, and Phoenicians, that is Canaanites from Tyre, as agents of the Assyrians, and the exile and resettlement overseas of Israelites from the 10 tribes. So that is one source. The Assyrians, apparently, when they conquered the Middle East, they had decided to transfer their enterprise to the West. And they set up colonies. They set up plantations in Spain, and mineral mining enterprises also in Spain and in Ireland and in Wales and in England and in France, and also possibly also in Scandinavia. And the Assyrians, when they did this, they not only did it themselves, but they also used people they had conquered as their agents, subcontractors, which we could call them, in this enterprise. And these contractors, these peoples, these mercenaries who helped them resettle conquered peoples, including Israelites in the west, including Philistines and Edomites and Phoenicians from Tyre. So that is one source of Israelites being a region. Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra, 1088 to 1164, on the book of Abijah 120, said that the Canaanites who came to the west were those who had fled from Joshua when Joshua, the Israelite, the Hebrew, from the tribe of Ephraim, led the Israelites in conquering the land of Canaan. Many fled, many of the Canaanites fled, and according to these sources, many of them came to Germany. He quotes Abijah 1 and the exiles of this host of the sons of Israel, who are among the Canaanites as far as Zarephath. The exiles of Jerusalem who in Sepharad will possess the cities of the Negev. And this first exile of the children of Israel is stretched from the Canaanites as far as Zarephath. And Ibn Ezra says on this, from the Canaanites, Ibn Ezra says, we have heard from great men, the land of Alaman, that is Germany in French, the land of Alaman, that is Germany, are the Canaanites who fled from before the children of Israel, and they came into the land. So to Zarephath means France. Also, a region west of the Rhine, a region west of the Rhine, approximately in Westphalia, is known as the country of Amor. Amor means Amorite. The Amorites are a major people amongst the Canaanites. The Canaanite is also a generic name for all of the Canaanites. And also we find the name Amor, another tribe of the Canaanites, also having their name used as a generic term for all the Canaanites in general. So this region of Westphalia was known as the country of Amor. That is the region of the Amorites. The Jacob, that is Israel, Jacob was renamed Israel. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were the forefathers of the Israelite nations. Jacob was renamed Israel. When Jacob was dying, he blessed his sons. And he referred to Zebulon, one of his sons, and he said his border shall adjoin Sidon. Sidon was a Canaanite city on the coast. But Jacob was prophesying concerning the end times. And he said, Jacob called his sons and said, Genesis 49, says, and Jacob called his sons and said, gather together, that I'm going to tell you what shall befall you in the end times. And he says, Genesis 49:13, Zebulon shall dwell on the shores of the sea, and he shall become a haven for ships. And his border shall adjoin Sidon. He will have a border adjoining Sidon in the end times. So this apparently is referring to an area in Western Europe, according to other verses, and bringing all the different sources together. As we said, Tyre and Sidon were the two major Canaanite cities, but there were other cities along the coast. There were also other settlements of the Canaanites throughout the Mediterranean region. Also, quite a few of what became the Greek cities, the Greek settlements, the Mycenaean colonization, had actually been Canaanite in its origin. So there too we find elements from Canaan having given root. And he refers to Sidon. And Zebulon, shall dwelling on the shores of the sea, shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. He shall be beside Sidon. And who is Sidon? Sidon is our regions to the east of the Netherlands, such as Hamburg, and the cities that gave rise to the Hanseatic League. And they were a major seafaring enterprise, an empire, almost an empire of their own. And we shall return to them. And in addition to that, we had the Netherlands, where Israelites settled, as may be seen in the names of peoples in that area, or peoples who later moved to that area, but were nearby from an early stage. One of these peoples, as mentioned by Ptolemy, as referred to as the Zebulon Goy. Zebulon Goy, Zebulon is another form of the name Zebulon, and Goy means people. So we have the people of Zebulon mentioned in an area adjacent to the Netherlands, and from which later settlers came to the Netherlands. And they're referred to as dwelling on the shores of the sea. And the people of the Netherlands do dwell on the shores of the sea. The term Netherlands means lower countries. It is low. Only about 50% of the Netherlands exceeds 1 meter above sea level. And this area too is subject to periodic inundation, to flooding from the sea. They did not build the dikes to keep the sea away. And 17% of the land is already below sea level. But the dikes, the dams that they placed along the coast, keep the sea out. And a lot of the land is actually taken from the sea. Originally, the old area was marsh and swamp. And they built up dikes, walls, and they created islands. And over the centuries, they pumped the waters out. That's why you see, when you see pictures of the Netherlands, you see windmills everywhere, all over the place, windmills. What are the windmills doing? They are pumping the water out from the land, keeping the land becoming swamp. From seawater. The Netherlands is reclaimed sea land or land that needs protection from the sea. The people of the Netherlands literally live on the seashores. The subsoil of the Netherlands, more than 50% of the country, and that the area where most of the populace, most of the people live in, the subsoil is sea sand. The people of the Netherlands live on the shores of the sea. The Netherlands is on the shores of the sea, and it has 18 million people, and a whole civilization behind it, a whole tradition of seafaring, of merchant, of trading, of fishing, of living from the sea. They had an empire, quite a large empire in the past. They had colonies in Africa, in South America, in India, in Indonesia. Indonesia was formerly known as Dutch Indies. All that belonged to the Netherlands and other areas. Some of their colonies were later taken over by the British, but originally the Dutch had settled them. That includes New Amsterdam, which became New York. Also Ceylon was also originally a Dutch colony. And now they have 18 million people living at quite a high standard, and they have a successful industry. They produce chips, the little chips to keep the computers running, are all produced in the Netherlands. And other countries cannot catch up with them in this, at least so far. Other countries have not been able to catch up with them on this matter, and they have a virtual monopoly in creating these chips for computers. And they have other industrial advantages. And they are quite industrious and enterprising, and they have a culture that they can be proud of in many ways. And this is all created from the land that they took back from the sea, on the shores of the sea. And this was promised to them, prophesied about them. And it is the only land in the world where this holds. There's no other country like it. There's no other country in the world that dwells on the shores of the sea like the Dutch people do. And this is what was prophesied concerning Zebulon. Zebulon will dwell on the shores of the sea. And the haven for ships. Rotterdam is the biggest port in Europe, the biggest or the second largest port in the world. And for quite a while, it has been predominant in Europe because of this. And Rotterdam is a seaport that links up with estuaries from the Rhine, and through the Rhine they can reach all Europe. We have Sidon, meaning areas in Germany, and we have Zebulon on the shores of the sea. And we find place names in Germany that they call Sidon. In addition to the Netherlands, in the Netherlands, we also find other Israelite tribes in Europe. We find the tribe of Dan in Denmark. Also, Asher became Asir in Sweden and Norway. We also find Naphtali in Norway, and Gad, the Goths in Sweden, and Issachar in Finland, and Manasseh in northern England and in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, and Ephraim in southern England. Also Asher and Dan in Ireland, Simeon and Wales along with Ephraim. And we find Reuben in France and other Israelites in other areas of Europe. And this has been proven by our research, as confirmed by various findings. Historically, we also had the Northwest Bloc, so-called Northwest Bloc. It was on linguistics, it's a hypothetical Northwest European cultural region around the area of the Netherlands and Belgium, and that area and the adjoining region into France, where linguistically they have found evidence of or related peoples. And this too, in its own way, is evidence of colonization from the Mediterranean region. Hamburg, or region near Hamburg, according to the map of Ptolemy, is known as Cording or Sording, another way of saying Sidon, and the other areas nearby with the name Sidon as part of their names. Also in Bremen and Limburg and other areas. Also in the Netherlands with the Canaanites. The Canaanites have a name which in Latin can indicate the League of Canaan. And in this region, we had the Hanseatic League, which was preeminently a league of cities, mainly German cities, but it was somewhat elastic. But it was the main cities were Hamburg, Bremen, and Lubeck. Eventually, there were 200 member cities, and it was a league of different cities for mercantile purposes, for trading. It had political overtones. And some people even see it as a precursor to the European Union in its arrangement. And its inner structure has been compared to that of the Phoenician cities. The Hanseatic League, its inner structure has been compared to that of the Hanseatic cities of Germany. And for a while they were very important, and they were rivals of the Netherlands, even though some regions in the Netherlands also belonged to them, also part of them. And this too shows the psychological and the cultural connection with the Phoenicians. And eventually they identified with the Germans. They helped the Nazis, but they were somewhat less committed, in a sense, relatively speaking, than the other population of Germany. There was a difference. Not a complete difference, but a partial difference. For instance, when the Allies were bombing that area, the local people, it was common amongst the local people to say they were being punished from heaven from how they treated the Jews. So this shows a certain degree of repentance, one could say. So that is what we have for the time being on that matter. May Lord God of Israel look after you and protect you. Thank you.